We will wait a little bit for some people to come in. Hope everyone's having a good day so far. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Hi everyone, my name is Carolyn Bradley, and on behalf of Campbell & Company, I'd like to welcome you to Fundraising Communications 4, Communications Materials for Major Gift Cultivation. Thank you for joining us today. And then for the next slide. So before we begin today's presentation, I'd like to quickly go through some logistics for those of you who may be new to our webinars. Please close any programs other than GoToWebinar that are running on your computer. We recommend calling in with the telephone instead of using your computer speakers. In addition to that, if you experience any visual issues or any kind of tech issues, please send a chat to Campbell & Company or contact GoToWebinar at the number on your screen. If you want to write that down, you're welcome to do that. So today's webinar will last 1 hour, and you'll earn 1 continuing education credit that is good with your participation with CFRE International. Within the next 24 hours, you will receive an email from GoToWebinar that includes information on how to download your certificate. In that same follow-up email, you'll also receive a link to download today's slides, along with a link to the recording. We do welcome questions throughout the webinar. Please use the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel that should be on the right side of your computer screen. We will also hold time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. And now I'd like to turn it over to our presenters today, Andy Brommel and Anna Gorin.
Thanks, Carolyn, and thanks everyone for joining us. Hope you're having a good week. Ready to go. I've got like 7 different beverages arranged around me, so I can be functional. I'm Andy Brommel. I'm Director of Communications Consulting for Campbell, based in Chicago. Along with Anna, I co-lead our communications team, which focuses on case development, campaign communications, a lot of the things that we will be talking about today. This is one of our kind of favorite sessions to do because we get to do a little show and tell about, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. People are saying they can't hear you, so I'm going to try something really quick. I'm not sure what's going on.
Okay. How about now?
Okay, sounds good. They can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, hi, folks. I'm Andy Brommel. I'm Director of Communications Consulting for Campbell. I'm based in Chicago. Along with Anna, I co-lead our communications practice, which focuses on case development and communications, mostly around fundraising. So this is one of our favorite topics to do. It really gets to the heart of how you bring a message to life in a fundraising setting in support of major gift cultivation. So looking forward to walking through this with you. Anna, you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Gorin. I'm a senior consultant at Campbell on our communications team. I'm here in our Seattle office, and yeah, just looking forward to the conversation today.
So this is part of our fundraising communications webinar series. I hope that some of you have attended some of these other sessions throughout the year. We do this every year, and it really starts from the idea that fundraising is communications. We're not selling like trinkets or widgets or something or services. What we really are doing as fundraisers is finding an audience, communicating a message to them that helps inspire them to take an action. So every fundraiser is a communicator, but most of us don't really have enough time or support or resources to support the communications aspect of our roles. There are some fundraising shops out there that have dedicated development communications. Don't see that often. It's always a good sign, but we created these webinars to try to provide resources to the many fundraisers out there who don't have a lot of dedicated communications support. So the webinar series over the last year, you can see the 5 different sessions. They all sort of build on each other, but it's fine if if this is the only one you've seen or your first one you're dropping in for. We'll make some references to other ones. You can find them on our YouTube channel. Just look up Campbell and Company on YouTube. And this is the 4th one. We have our 5th one coming up at the end of August, which is really all about campaigns. So if you're thinking about a campaign or even down the road in the future, I want to check that one out as well. So and as Carolyn mentioned, we of course encourage you to ask questions. We're going to have some time at the end to dig into those. So let's dive in. Today's session is all about communications materials that support major gift cultivation. So it's a pretty specific topic, but it's something that we created this one because we found that a lot of organizations struggle with this. You're typically regularly producing communications materials for annual giving. There's a lot more direct mail, a lot more like regular broad-based communications happening there. But for the high value, high dollar major gift part of your strategy, a lot of organizations just don't really have dedicated materials to support that. And so we think there's a real opportunity there. So the last time we did this webinar, this specific one, was 2019. I don't know, Anna, do you feel like anything has changed since then?
It's been a somewhat significant 2 years, I would say. No, I mean, it's wild to think back to the last time we did this webinar, and there's quite a lot that's changed, and then a little bit that really hasn't changed. I think, especially in the last 18 months since the pandemic, materials kind of had a different job to do. I think as we all felt this separation from our donors and from our communities, where we didn't have that same in-person opportunity for communication. We're sort of some organizations are starting to get back to that now, but we really had quite a big chunk of time where all of a sudden that in-person communication we were relying on and the materials to support that in-person cultivation were no longer possible. So I think there was this new appreciation for the importance of what digital communications have to do and what materials can do when you cannot meet face-to-face, right? So if you're meeting over Zoom, what do you need to be able to create that kind of connection and education and engagement? So we saw a lot of that. We also just saw a lot of our clients, and we work with nonprofits really in every sector, lots of different sizes, just take a little bit more of a straightforward, get it done, do what must be done approach to materials. So if organizations had been in the swing of, producing a particular style of annual report every year or producing the same kind of major donor brochure every year or two, really in these last 2 years, organizations stopped to say, hey, what do we actually need to fundraise? And maybe it looks a little bit different. Maybe we have a shorter time frame to raise this money. Maybe we have to do some crisis fundraising and we need to put together different materials for our major donors to do that, or we have different constraints on that process. So we really saw a lot of creativity, a lot of innovation, a lot of flexible materials when we just didn't really know a lot of what was going to happen or be coming down the pike. And I think that, and I hope that a lot of that creativity and innovation and sometimes cost savings sort of lends itself to new strategies for materials into 2021 and beyond. A couple of things that really didn't change is just the unique value of materials dedicated for major gift cultivation. They might look different, right? So the 14 or 18 page fancy brochure that you might have printed may have looked like a digital deck in the last year. But we're still seeing organizations want to take the time and resources to put together something for those major donor conversations, right? For people who are already bought into the mission, who already, are considering some kind of transformational gifts. And then print materials, still are being produced. I think there's a general sense that people are moving away from print, that, there's a lot of focus on how to engage younger donors or people with shorter attention spans. But there is a lot of value in print materials, especially, from an accessibility point of view for folks who really, either don't have access to the internet or aren't fluent in the internet. For older folks, we're seeing a lot of print materials continue to be really valuable for things like plan giving. So print materials are not going away, but I think organizations are getting a lot more strategic about how they're using them. And so these materials can support major gift cultivation in a lot of different ways. It's not just about the conversation itself, although of course it is helpful to have materials there, as kind of a something to hang on to in a conversation and in an ask. But it's also a primer, right? It's something to prepare someone, to get someone in the door, to warm them up for the conversation so you can come in sort of ready with questions. It can be your cultivation tool, and we're seeing that work a lot, especially with sort of digital materials, which we'll get into later. It's a really great piece to send after a conversation. So if the first way to get connected with a donor is in the conversation itself, and maybe you only have 30 minutes, you can't cover a whole lot, you can say, hey, I'll follow up with something, I'll send you something in the mail. And that gives them the time to really kind of sit on it and ruminate on it. Bringing materials to events, of course, as we're starting to get back into the world of events, that can be really helpful. And then also as an internal resource, having for board members and ambassadors and volunteers, just having the confidence of having that thing that they can use and sit with and practice with before they go out and really sort of serve as an ambassador for your organization can be incredibly helpful. The thing that we see a lot with all of this, of course, looking at this now, we can see all the value of materials for major gift cultivation. But most of the time, there really isn't the headspace or the time or the foresight to really plan for the time it takes to produce the materials that can do all of this, right? We often see people, even with editorial calendars and things like that, there's just always so much going on. And like Andy said, often not the dedicated resources to development communications to be able to say, in 6 months, we're going to go out and ask, we need to raise this much money from our major donors. What are we going to need to be able to do that? There's often this kind of, it often sneaks up on our clients, and that can be a tough place to be because you really want to put together the materials that they're going to help you do the best work you can do. Materials also sort of have more of an esoteric function too, which is that it just makes the ideas real. So, you have all the practical pieces that we just talked about, but they really do kind of activate some of these bigger vision ideas that you might have been tossing around as an organization, whether it's in your strategic planning process, or you've had some kind of visioning process, or you've had a staff retreat. The materials are what bring those ideas to life, both for your donors and for you, for an organization. So, when you put a print piece, or when you send a digital piece to a donor, it makes your campaign or your fundraising effort, it just makes it real, right? It's something, there's something about just having a casual conversation and mentioning it and seeing that sort of vivid, striking piece that makes it feel like, okay, this is something I'm going to be asked to do, and this is something I really need to read and consider. It sort of conveys a level of seriousness. And I think that same idea translates for internal organizations. We often see this in our work where we might be working on something, messaging or a message platform, and we're tossing around ideas and we're getting really good buy-in from a client or an organization. And then, of course, when we have to, dot the I's and cross the T's and actually put together a real piece, that's where the level of scrutiny comes in right at the last minute. So it feels like, okay, this is something I really need to take seriously, and especially if it's a print piece, we can't go back and change it, right? There's a level of finality. There can be a level of finality and just sort of concreteness to it that that we often really need to get us to move on to the next step. You can stay in the dreamy head messagey space for a pretty long time, but that's not what's going to raise you the money.
So materials also give us confidence. This is true for all kinds of fundraisers, whether it's your CEO or gift officers, definitely your board or volunteers, campaign committee. People don't like to go out into donor visits empty-handed. And that can become an objection or an obstacle to them actually making their calls. They feel like, you know, if they feel like they don't have something to share, they might feel like we don't have a case or we don't have a story to tell. When they do have materials, you know, you feel like you have something to give to a donor. You feel like if I get asked a question, I can go back to this piece. I can kind of, you know, even if I get a tough question, I have a piece to sort of go back to. So my reference here, which I might be dating myself with this. I don't know how many of y'all grew up watching Dumbo, but it's a movie about an elephant who has these giant ears that allow him to fly. He has this little magic feather, and he's convinced, he thinks that the magic feather is why he can fly. And I'm gonna go ahead and spoil the movie for you, so cover your ears. He loses the feather, and it turns out he actually didn't need the feather. He discovers he could fly all along. It was because of his ears, not because of the feather. Like, materials can be that for us. A lot of us who are close to organizations, we actually already have everything we need to be really effective in talking about the organization, telling our story, sharing our passion. But when we have that piece in our hands or that like deck that supports us, it just makes us feel like we've got our magic feather. Materials also elevate your message. And I want to be careful with this because they don't replace having an effective message. So having a really strong core message is still the most important thing. This is what we talk about in the first couple webinars in the series. So if you haven't seen, in particular, the second one, pause time and go back and check it out. If you're watching this in the future on YouTube, you can pause and go watch the second one, which is all about crafting messaging. But okay, let's say you've done that, you've got your core message, you know what you're trying to say. Materials give you the chance to pair that message with photography that brings it to life, to use design to direct people's attention to the most important points, to put it into physical formats that make it feel more significant and permanent. So once you've done that work to craft a message, materials just take it to the next level. But they also impose useful constraints. This is particularly true of print materials. What you see in the background here is this is the wireframe format that we use to map out a brochure or a print piece before we go into full drafting. You know, when you're just writing in Word documents, like a Word document can go on forever, and you know they usually do. With a brochure, you have a page count. With a slide deck, you have to know like what is the one key idea per slide. So they force you to think about what goes first, what goes second, what is the hierarchy, how do we balance factual information with storytelling and quotes and testimonials. Even when you've put a lot of care into crafting your case, the physical format is going to bring a little bit more useful constraints that force you to commit. Because you might be thinking, oh, well, you know, we have like 10 different messages for 10 different audiences, and that's can be true overall. But when you have to print a brochure, like you have to really think, what is the one thing that we say first, and what is the most important thing we want to come out across all of these audiences? So
one thing.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say, Andy, you know, something we see a lot, and you know, if you've ever been on the other side of this, where you're an organization and you might be spinning your wheels a little bit on your message, trying to get buy-in from a lot of people. Maybe you have a really great culture of inclusion, you know, which is really important, but you can't sort of bring it to that next step to really, you know, finalize that message and bring it out there. It might be time to go through the process, the exercise of putting together some kind of material, because if you can't get there in your regular process, putting together something will force you into that constraint. So we see that a lot when we start a project that is going to end in a sort of print piece or a deck. We say, you know, going through this process will help us get to the kind of rigor and decision making we need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been talking about print materials a bit here, just in the last couple slides. We might ask ourselves, you know, it's 2021. We're talking to you virtually and digitally. None of us have left our homes in 18 months or whatever. You know, why are we still talking about print materials? Like, why are we still producing these? So I don't know, Anna, what do you think?
Well, I think for one, there are a lot of examples, like I was talking about earlier in the shift from 2019 to 2021, where we probably don't need print materials in a lot of examples when we did use them, or we did see organizations use them. So I think 2021 is about being really thoughtful about when we do need print materials. And, you know, I think that starts with looking at your budget. You know, there's a big budgetary difference between, you know, doing a huge run of print materials and working on a digital deck, looking at how much you know about what you're fundraising for and your message. I think especially during the pandemic, there was just so much uncertainty, but people still needed to go out and ask for money. And that was just such a kind of a breakthrough moment for fundraisers, right? When you're so used to needing to know the FAQ answers and really needing to have everything wrapped up in a nice bow before putting it in front of a donor. This was our chance to say, no, you know, our work is important, it's valuable. Here's what we know and here's what we don't know. And to be able to tell that story, you're going to need something more flexible. So looking at, you know, what do we know and what do we not know? And then if the answer to that is, you know, we know some information that is probably not going to change. We feel like we can make some room in our budget for print materials, and we know that there is an audience out there for it. We know a little bit about what our major donors, how they like to engage with information, and that money is going to be well spent. I think that's a great opportunity to use print materials. I think especially because, right, some donors and fundraisers still love them. There is really no replacement for something that either you get in your mail or is placed in front of you on a table, or that you can hold in your hands. And I think especially as people rely more and more on things like digital newsletters and email communication, we know that is the primary way that nonprofits and kind of annual donors are engaging with organizations. When you want to sort of elevate that message and elevate that experience for major donors, a print material might actually help you do that, right? Might help it feel like it's something separate and not getting lost in your spam folder and just able to be erased with the click of a button, right? They're still the best leave behind. They're gonna get read more, and they're gonna sort of have more of a powerful effect than a digital piece, which again is just gonna live alongside a million other PDFs on your desktop. And there's just something about the ritual. I think, Andy, we were talking about, wedding invitations, right? And wedding invitations can be certainly digital as well. But there is something about getting something I know when I check my mail now, I'm sort of like leafing through all these old bills and spam for some kind of real message that's directed towards me. And there's something really special about getting that message that feels different than an email. It feels more personal. It feels special. And there's that ritual of exchange, right? I made this for you. I can hold this in my hand, right? So I think there are still reasons to produce print materials. They're not going totally out of style. But, ask yourself a few questions before you're considering actually going through with it.
Yeah. I mean, everything you just said, like we're narrowing in the use cases for print materials, but they still do have some values that are just hard to replace digitally. And some of it may be generational, or may just be like what we expect. It's like part of the material culture of fundraising, that like when you put a significant hard copy, nicely produced piece in someone's hands, there's an effect that that we're conditioned to expect to some degree.
And I would say, if you don't know if your donors like print materials or not, that's a really good thing to find out, right? Because really some donors might say, some major donors will say, don't send me the print piece, don't spend the money on it. I just want to have a conversation, send me an email. And others might really, really appreciate it. It might be the difference between having the conversation that lands at an $1,000 gift or a $10,000 gift. And so really understanding that donor behavior and culture is really the key here.
Yeah, we've got clients who are leaning much more in digital directions. We've got clients who are still telling us, for our donors and for our board, we still need a brochure. And, we sort of engage in those discussions without a whole lot of, we're happy to go sort of either way, whatever's actually going to help them get out the door and make their calls. So this is really the only absolutely important point we want to make sure you take away today. Very few organizations have the materials that they need specifically to support major gift cultivation, because it's not really anybody's job in most fundraising shops. It takes time and attention that nobody really has. And so most organizations really would benefit from making a reasonable investment in some durable materials, so stuff you can use for 3 years or so to support major gift cultivation. When you think about it, this is the highest value, highest return on investment area of a fundraising program. This is so if you can produce pieces and take the time and energy and maybe spend a little bit of money producing some things that actually ease your path to a $25,000 gifts, $50,000 gifts, $100,000 gifts, $1 million gifts, like that, it's worth it. And we really believe you can do this well at any budget. The budget that makes sense and is appropriate does sort of scale with the size of the organization, with the size of, if it's a campaign, the goal of the campaign, the complexity of the campaign. So, but there's, we just want to make sure, like, that even if you're a very small organization, there are ways to do this that can help you make asks effectively without spending a significant amount of money. And we're gonna show you some examples that hopefully bring that home. So let's do some show and tell. Let's talk about what kinds of things can we make to support major gift cultivation. This is going to be a bit of show and tell. We're going to show some different examples. We're going to talk about how different types of pieces can be constructed. As you go through this, just think about what these might be like for your organization. Think about your specific people. What would help them feel confident going into their major donor conversations? What feels appropriate to you, to your brand, to your culture, to what your comfort level is. So as we're going through, we're going to show you a lot of different clients, a lot of different organizations from all different sectors, but think about what these might look like for you.
We should start with the presentation deck, because this is the piece of the last 18 months, I would say. It's been requested, from us probably the most frequently, both by organizations who had already been comfortable with presentation decks and by organizations who had been doing them for the first time because of the pandemic, because all of a sudden they're thrust into this world of digital donor cultivation and they need something they can have on a Zoom call or sort of send over email. So we'll look at a lot of different examples of these, but just want to talk through, what is a presentation deck, because I think it looks a little different or sounds a little different to every person. So format-wise, we're talking mostly about a designed PowerPoint deck. It's intended for screen, so it's widescreen, it's editable and adaptable. You can create these in InDesign, which is going to have a nicer, it's going to have a more polished design shine on it. But I would say that one of the main values of a presentation deck is the editability, right? So fundraisers can go in there, change the talking points, change the content on the slide. And we've done a really good job on our end of finding ways to have some things that are designed statically, so they're designed in InDesign, and you might have an image, a really striking image, or an icon, or a headline message that's really beautiful and is not going to change. And then you also have some sub copy that you can edit on the fly, right? So that's the format. The content itself can really vary, and I think the number one question that we ask when we get started on a project like this is, who's going to use it and how are they going to use it, right? So you might have a presentation deck that's a little more content heavy because somebody wants to print it out and send it over email and have people really sit with the content. Other people are really wanting to use it more in a conversation, so they're going to have less on the slide, more visually appealing, more striking. Some people want to have just a lot of information in the talking points that they can riff on. Some people want to have more on the slide. So this should really be designed and built for you, for your volunteers, for your fundraisers, and for the setting that you're going to be cultivating donors in, right? So typically a presentation deck will have kind of two sections to it. It'll have their vision section, that's usually less content, more striking, some headline messages, kind of one big idea per slide, like Andy was talking about. And then there's going to be the nuts and bolts section where you have a little more text. Slides might be able to stand alone as more information or education slides, all that supporting content that someone's going to want to need before they make some kind of big gift decision. And then the function like the format and the content is also, there's a really wide range. And I think that's the key to this format. It's very, very flexible and very, very adaptable. So it can be used as a conversation tool, kind of flipping through on a digital Zoom call, right? So people are looking at a shared screen together. You could have it be a more formal kind of TED Talk style presentation if you were doing like a digital webinar or a digital town hall or something like that. And you can also, in some cases, we've had organizations have them used as both a digital piece and they've printed them out. It's not going to be optimized for print in the same way as a brochure, but you can sort of bind these and print them out as well. So, asking yourself the question of how are we going to use this? How do we want to optimize it, for a conversation or a leave behind can really help sort of create the best, most flexible, most adaptable piece that you possibly can. So we'll scroll through. Andy, anything else you'd want to add about just, I know we worked on a lot of these over the last year. Anything else you want to add here?
No, I think let's just I'll scroll through some sample slides and you tell us what we're seeing or talk about what
Sure.
how these are constructed.
Sure. So, when you think about the constraints that Andy talked about earlier, I think this is a really nice example of you might be, hashing out lots of nice vision messages, internally in your message platform or your talking points. And this is the place where we get to really elevate those powerful messages that a conversation can build around. So this one for AAP, American Association of Pediatrics, we work for every child's future. This could be, a 5-minute intro of a conversation for an executive director, right? Or of a presentation for an executive director. And there may be a whole vision sort of wrapped up in this message, but it's sort of brought to life by that slide, right? So, and then you have the supporting slides around it where you can highlight the numbers and the data and the sort of the visual cues that you can talk around that kind of give you that guidance or that confidence on the screen, right? So you can see that it's a little less text heavy than a brochure. You can't cram too much onto a PowerPoint. We've all sort of seen the downfalls of that. But there is some room for variation, right? For some really nice images on widescreen to really pop out, and then to have some icons and some information and bullet points and talking points that can help you really sort of move through a conversation with all the supporting details that you need to. A really nice thing about a presentation deck as well is you can really, really lean on the notes section, right? So you only need to put on the slide what is essential, what is going to sort of cue you to remember some kind of points that you can flex or tailor to any particular conversation. And there's just a lot of room for adaptability here, right? So we've seen a lot of people put together decks where there's like a core set of slides that you'll always have. And then there's maybe a whole appendix of extra slides, and you might bring in some slides for your corporate audience, and you might bring in some slides for the people who really care about this portion of your mission or this kind of program. And there's just a lot of sort of mixing and matching, shortening and lengthening that you can do to really sort of position yourself for success in any particular donor conversation.
Yeah, I like this American Academy of Pediatrics sample because it's like so down the middle of just like a nice, I think it's maybe, I don't know, 12 or 15 slides. Each one has like one idea and a few supporting points. They're using really nicely. They're drawing on the power of photography to bring the messages to life. And you realize how little you actually need on the slides to help you tell the story, to like give you the main beats in the messaging. And then, as Anna said, like down in the talking point section, there's a whole script, there's a full length version. You can do a 5 to 7 minute version of this presentation. You can do a 15 or 20 minute version. It's really, and you can flip through it with a donor in one-on-one. It's just really, and the photography is, I mean, obviously with their mission, like the photography potential is sort of unstoppable. I mean, I just love these photos. Anna, you want to talk about how these work when you take them into a Flipbook format or do the printed format?
Sure. And, we'll get into the photography point later, but you can see with a piece like this, especially on widescreen, where there's just some sparse messaging, you really do need good images. And that's another, point of hurdle that we often come up against with clients that we'll get into later. So, using a presentation deck as a printed Flipbook is another way of having a sort of like multi-tool of a presentation deck, right? Where you could have a digital version that you send as a PDF or walk through on a screen, but then you also have a bound version, and that bound version might actually have a little more on the slide or on the page, right? So it means that it takes a little more work to sort of re-optimize this for print, but it's a lot more efficient than making a whole brochure and a whole digital piece, right? Those are two really separate pieces with different functions. This is a much more sort of multi-use piece. And this one we did for the Fen School, they use in all those different ways, right? So they felt like some of their donors needed something that they can hold on to. They were going to do some stuff remotely because people were all over the place. And so this was a good option for them to have, one piece that's really optimized for all these different things.
Yeah. Do you have to like redesign it a little bit for letter size versus widescreen, or you're going to print it and bind it on like legal size paper and sort of leave it as is? But that'd be a little bit, it's hard to put that in your purse. So, and like, I think they printed these out in runs of, 10 or 25 or 50 or something.
Exactly.
This is Kinko's right here, spiral binding, printing off small runs. The unit cost is not too crazy.
Yep.
And it's just like, it's a nice middle option for if it doesn't feel quite normal to like sit down with your donors with an iPad or a laptop or a screen or something. You want a physical thing, but you still want the like sort of point progression of a deck versus like a brochure, which is a little bit harder to speak from in a conversation. This can be a nice down the middle kind of option. It does, as Anna was mentioning, it does sort of, when you're going for the printed Flipbook version of a deck, sometimes that would lean you toward having slightly more copy on the slide or on each page. So this is a Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra example where I love the design on this piece, beautiful visuals. They wanted it to serve as kind of a reading document or a leave behind as well as a presentation document. So there's like a little bit more text on the slide. There are some, like, look at this one. This one's got a little bit more of a full paragraph kind of approach, but still, as long as the lead messages still jump off the slide, then you can still kind of use it as a presentation or a conversation document. So there are ways to kind of like split the difference between something that's really optimized for presentation and something that's really optimized for reading. You can't actually have it both ways, but you can kind of go down the middle if that's what you need.
Like a version A or B, which is not so difficult to put together. I think the key is kind of asking yourself, are we going to primarily use this always accompanied by a person, or are we going to need, are we going to really need to have a donor look at this on their own without someone from our organization? And that can really help you determine, do we need to do this other sort of reading version or not?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Want to talk about this one, Anne? It's kind of an interesting, kind of like popped up over the last year with a number of our client projects.
Yeah, this is, we're calling it a digital booklet. It might be called like a digital overview, a 2 or 4 pager. It's really just a very short digital piece that is optimized for reading on a screen. And we've seen a lot more requests for these, I think, for a couple of reasons. One is they're relatively, low barrier to produce. They're shorter, so you can do them more quickly. You don't have to go through the whole print experience, so it sort of cuts out some time from the editorial calendar. And just during the pandemic, having people receive something that feels special and designed in the way you might design a brochure, but it's just easy to access and a little flexible. So you might use it in the way you would a brochure, where it's a primer for a conversation. It might be a leave behind. I think with this client, for the example on the next page, which we'll get to in a second, and I had a couple of clients who really felt like our donors, particularly in the last sort of year or so, as the pandemic was, there was a lot of crisis fundraising, people were getting a lot of calls for support, and there was just kind of a threshold of communications overload, right? And people were really feeling sensitive about bombarding donors with just too much material. And so this was a really nice option to have, the high level vision, the high level ask, some of the core pieces of information without overwhelming someone with, the whole spiel about a particular fundraising ask. So it's shorter, it's more focused, It's designed to read on screen, and it's really flexible in how it can be used. So if you want to go to the next slide, so this is one we created for Tipping Point Community. They're an organization in the Bay Area that fights poverty. And, you know, of course, they, like many organizations, were doing a ton of crisis response fundraising in the early part of the pandemic, and then really wanted to go back to major donors and communicate with them. But again, we're, you know, wanting to be thoughtful about not bombarding them with just too much. And this ended up being a really nice middle ground. We had initially talked about doing a big, long deck for these major donor conversations. And we ended up pivoting away from that and towards this. And we had some internal talking points that donors, that fundraisers could use in conversation that sort of expanded on each of these points. But this was really, I mean, it was only, you know, these 3 panels, these sort of widescreen panels, but it really had quite a lot of information and included the nice vision language. You have the first 2 panels are more sparse and have these really nice images. The middle full panel has, you know, their core strategy and all this information. And it was really easy to use both as a primer for a conversation to really help someone realize, I'm trying to get your attention because we're making an ask and this is important. And then sometimes when they were already in front of someone, they were able to send it afterward as a way of sort of making the ask feel real, and having some of that quality of a brochure, sort of the specialness of a brochure without going through the process of printing it. And this was also something that was easy to edit as the plans changed.
Yeah, I think this is a really nice adaptation. And it has, yeah, some of the qualities of a print piece, but you know that people aren't going to read on screen as long as they would, you know, flip. They don't have quite the same like attention span for something that they might flip through in hard copy. But I'd like to see more organizations doing stuff like this. It's sort of a digital reader. I also like, I mean, this has 6 pages, which is an impossible number in an actual hard copy print piece. You have to do 4, 8, 12, 16. So it's kind of
right.
Like you free yourself from some of the constraints. I can't think of how many times I've wanted to do like a 6-page or a 10-page brochure, and it's like, no, you can't. That's there's pages would have to be printed on the back of nothingness. So let's talk about print pieces. For a bit, and obviously this is like a very wide range of possible approaches, but they're still relevant for some of the reasons we've been talking about. And the main point I want to make is like, there's probably an approach to print materials that makes sense for your organization, whether that's like a 2-page, we just need like a 1-pager front and back of a single sheet that boils all of our key messages down and makes it, you know, nicely laid out with like basic design, or, you know, that 24-page campaign centerpiece publication for a big campaign that's almost like a coffee table book and is richly designed. Or maybe it's more of a modular system where you have a core piece and then separate inserts for particular projects. You know, you don't have to do any of this, and there's no like, there's no, all these traditions are sort of out the window in terms of what you need in order to have like a legitimate campaign or major gift to ask. It's really just what is going to help you. The content obviously driven by the length, and the function of these, as we've mentioned, like they're really still probably the gold standard for leave behinds after a major donor call. They can be useful to send ahead. It's not quite as good as a deck for actually talking through during a donor visit. It's just harder to speak from a brochure than a flipbook or a deck. And since we're focused on major giving, these would typically be delivered individually, like hand to hand. But you can also, there can be moments in a campaign or a major gift program where it makes sense to mail them out a little bit more broadly, or to produce kind of a mini brochure that goes out to a broader audience, maybe around the public launch of the campaign. And they still, I don't know what that magic is. It's just, they still convey substance, significance, and permanence in a way that digital native publication or pieces and decks just still don't. Maybe I wouldn't be surprised if that changes over the next 10 years, but I think that's still kind of where we're at. So we've all seen brochures before. This is not news to us, but let's just, I'm just going to flip through a couple different examples and just make a couple observations. A piece we did for Ignite, which is a fantastic national organization. And what this piece does well, I would say, is it's built around core messages. Remember that point from earlier. The point of these materials is to elevate a core message that you've already really, really defined. So we're not writing paragraphs just to write paragraphs. We're figuring out what is the core message for each spread and what is the best way to convey that visually in a way that feels immediately clear. You can skim it and get the key message. If you're interested in the key message, you can read a little bit more and get a little bit more supporting detail. You're seeing a balance of people and faces and factoids and statistics and stories and quotes, thinking about the balance of content that will allow, you know, left brain, right brain, people with different information needs and different kind of reading styles to create as many doorways into your message for people who have different kind of ways of processing information. So this is just a nice, I like this as an example because it's not too long, it's not too short, it's got a nice balance of content. Photography and design support the message really nicely. You know, for larger campaigns, for more landmark efforts, some organizations produce the more traditional kind of prestige brochures. This is one that we still like to look back to for inspiration pretty regularly. For the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, campaign is called Beautiful Work. It's a College of Art and Design, so you know it needs to speak in a more inspirational visual language. Actually had full of samples of student and faculty work that you could interchangeably put in. You could change out these like sample cards within the cover of the piece, so you could have different work showing through the cover. Some unique production touches, really high quality printing, this like thread stitched binding in the branded color of the campaign, you know, just like little touches that make it feel a little bit more special. All of the copy in this piece was actually on these smaller inset pages. See how that kind of flips back and forth. We did that so that the larger images of student and faculty work were not, we didn't want to like have anything interfering with the actual images of student and faculty work. Again, it was kind of a modular piece with different inserts that you could tuck in to create different experiences. So you can go bigger. You could still do things like that for, you know, to give a campaign in particular a little bit greater sense of substance. You can still do, you know, shorter brochures or pieces that still feel substantial. This is a piece that I think actually only had 4 pages of internal content, but because of the kind of white paper style of the layout with very, very sort of factual and you know, balance of really tight copy, clear vision statements, supporting stats, it ended up feeling pretty substantial while still only, again, this is here's page 1, here's 2, 3, here's page 4. That's it. And then we have inserts that tucked in to the back to go into different campaign funding priorities in a little bit more depth. So this kind of modular system can be really helpful for organizations and campaigns where it doesn't make sense to go to this fully produced level. Even just taking what is basically a simple Word document and dressing it up with just a basic amount of like white paper style design. So it just looks a little bit more professional. It doesn't look like it's like straight out of Microsoft Word. Even just doing that will accomplish that transformation where something stops looking like a draft and starts looking like, oh, this is real and it's really happening. So even just very simple white paper style designs with minimal design, basic layouts, anchored in your brand standards, can still, like, really effective. It still makes it feel real. I mentioned this is just another example of modular systems. This is the right solution for so many different projects and campaigns and organizations. Having, you know, a master brochure that speaks to your larger message, that can be more of the storytelling piece, more stories, more quotes, more photos, and then letting all the more supporting detail live in inserts. Those can be full color, full professionally printed like these are, or you can actually have the inserts be something you print in your office and are more like desktop published if the projects are still evolving. So this is a nice way of balancing the visionary piece with the more informational piece. And of course, also under the category of print materials, stationery, presentation folders. This is typical for campaigns. Just having even like a 9x12 designed folder that allows you to tuck all these materials together and sort of, it can make your whole campaign or effort feel a little bit more pulled together and a little bit more substantive. So these are still useful, and we're not there. It's maybe not quite as much of a default. We're probably doing fewer stationery and folder type projects than we were doing 5 years ago, but there's still a use for these that can be really handy. So we've been talking about print materials and presentation decks. The other question that a lot of times this comes up from board members. They've been to an event, they've seen a great video for some other organization, and they say, oh, we need a video. This is like, I can't count how many times this comes up from campaign committee members. And so, the thing with video from our perspective is that it is expensive from a production standpoint. It is static. Once you do it, it's very difficult to edit. It's very production intensive. Even when you're working with a full service partner, that you have to put a lot of time and energy into planning the shoot, arranging all the locations and people who will be involved. These are big productions, but they do still have, they are uniquely powerful in conveying the emotional core or the visionary core of your message. It's not typically a good vehicle for conveying a lot of project detail, but for capturing the emotional core, there's still probably nothing better. So it really becomes a question of defining, if you think, then again, this is specific to major donor cultivation. If you're asking whether we need this to support major gift conversations, you have to really think about your use case. When will we send this to donors? How many times will we use it? Is it just for our gala event and we'll never use it again? Can we picture our people actually using this either to send ahead of a major donor conversation, showing at the beginning of a major donor conversation to kind of set the emotional tone? Is it something we would send afterward to kind of sustain the emotional engagement after we've had a conversation? Like, if you're going to spend the money on video, you really need to think about what is the use case, and ideally, could it serve multiple organizational uses? Is it something we could use at an event, do a separate edit that works nicely for major donor cultivation, or we could break it out into a series of videos that we show on our social media? If you're going to spend the money on video, you really got to think about how to get the greatest value out of it. Think beyond the sort of captive audience gala videos, like 3 to 5 minute campaign centerpiece videos. Again, that might be optimized for a single event, but if you put it on your website, no one's going to watch all 5 minutes of it. And it can be awkward to use in actual one-on-one donor cultivation. So if you need a video like that, be thinking about how could we break it up into 3 separate 1-minute videos that we roll out digitally, or that we embed into a presentation deck. So let's say you're sitting down with a donor, you're going to walk through, you're going to start the conversation, go through a couple of slides, and then say, oh, and then here's a video in which our head of such and such program talks about what this new building is going to do for that program. And then you can pepper that in, or actually load it into the presentation deck. And then, here's a little 60-second or 30-second video in which here's a student who's benefited from a scholarship, just talking about what a difference that made in their life. So if you can flow it into an actual donor conversation in a more organic way versus like, let's turn the lights off and sit still for 5 minutes and watch this centerpiece video, you might be getting closer to like a really an investment that really makes sense. You can always, of course, think about creative or lower cost production approaches, whether that's going with more of an animated explainer type video that doesn't involve shooting, or if you have either volunteer or board member resources, or you have students who you could involve in the production. Think about ways to get this done, to deliver on the goal. And it could be something much lower budget, much more just like homemade and authentic, and still be very powerful. We see when you look at what works on social media, it's not like richly, expensively produced videos, like things that are more authentic and real and shorter, and feel a little more handmade can be actually more effective. And then finally, like, just remember, you don't have to produce video for major gift cultivation. That's a lot of times the right answer is to wait until, in a campaign context, wait until the public launch for video. So video, it's, you know, we love video, but it's just, and of course you need to like get multiple, really bid out the project to figure out how much you need to spend. We just did a video project for a campaign launch recently. We had bids ranging from, I think, about 12,000 to 75,000 for the exact same video from different video partners, because people make different assumptions. So that's kind of just some ways to think about video. You got to really think clearly about that. So Anna, I don't know. What do you think? Like, if you could only have one piece, or you're working with a limited budget, had to do it all in-house, what would you lean toward, or how would you advise an organization?
I just go back to the flexibility of the presentation deck, and I've just seen that the primary piece that people have leaned on for multiple uses. So I would say, if you had to choose, the presentation deck is going to be your all-purpose thing, but all these other pieces have their unique, they have like a special quality to them and have a special purpose if you're able to branch out from there.
Yeah, I think I probably feel the same. I think there are a lot of organizations who might be able to do like a simple white paper style print piece that helps support that as well. It'd still be really useful even with a limited budget. And if you feel like you need video, think about, again, some kind of really low cost way of doing it that's more just hearing the voices of people within and around your organization. Do some really quick tips for how to produce great materials. We're a little short on time here. Anna, you want to talk about like how to plan great materials?
Yeah, like I mentioned before, the ability for these processes to really sneak up on you is just kind of it's so frequent. So really just taking the time with your editorial calendar to think about, to plan ahead and really plot out the time for everyone who's going to be involved, all the reviewers, the partners, if you're going to be using them, getting on design calendars, is going to be really important. So that's the give yourself time piece. And sort of backing up from that, before you can really get into the production of the piece itself, you got to make sure your message is solid, right? So we do see some organizations come in and say, oh, I need a brochure, but they haven't really done the thinking of, what's the vision, right? What's the ask? What's the urgency? Make sure your message is clear and get the visual identity right. So not every major donor campaign necessarily needs its own distinctive visual identity, but you're going to need to have some kind of sense of, what do we want this to look and feel like? What do we want the tone to be? How does it relate to our brand, right? So that's where some of the earlier webinars in the earlier part of the series, particularly the one on messaging, will give you some insight into how you do that foundational work. Choosing quality over quantity, particularly, I think that goes back to the question about what format are you going to use that actually serves your goals and helps you make the ask. And yes, making sure you're taking the time to ask the fundraisers and the leaders in your organization and your volunteers, what format would you actually use? What do you need to be able to feel confident and tell this story, and cluing into how your donors like to receive that information.
So that's kind of covers the planning side. When you get into actually producing materials, a couple of tips that we just have absorbed from these projects over the years. First, invest in better photography. It doesn't cost that much, and what you see with the way people respond to materials is driven hugely by the visuals, and it's driven hugely within that by the photography. So this is something that we tend to put off, and so many organizations we work with haven't really, like, they have a really limited set of photo assets that they've already used a few too many times. So if you just do one thing, book a new photo shoot to get the photography that you need at a really high editorial quality. Second, do one thing to make these pieces special. You don't have to go crazy on the production level. In fact, your donors don't want the pieces to feel expensive typically. But if you can just do one production touch, whether it's something, a paper that's a little bit nicer, a foil treatment, something that makes the piece stand out a little bit, just one touch often is really appropriate especially for campaign pieces. Write design pieces so that you can use them for 3 years. You should be thinking in that time frame, especially with print materials. Obviously with decks, you can always update those, but for print materials, you've got to think about how can we get mileage out of these pieces. And again, think about the right balance of copy, photos, stories and voices, the human side, stats and factoids, the more rational side, and of course, white space. So think about not just like how can we drive all of the copy and word count that we want to put out there. Like think about how you can really balance each spread or each slide to give a nice sort of balanced experience. So,
hey Andy, we are at the top of the hour, so
yeah.
I don't know if you wanted to keep going for a couple more minutes or if you just wanted to wrap up.
I think we got to wrap. We got a little too excited about show and tell. Any questions that you've asked, we will follow up with by email. We want to make sure we can get back to everybody. As a reminder, we do have the next webinar in the series coming toward the end of August. We hope you might be able to sign up for that one. It's going to be all about campaigns. And again, all of these are up on our YouTube channel. And with that, we'll just say thank you and encourage you, if you have any further questions or thoughts you want to bounce off of us, we love talking about this stuff, reach out to us by email. Thank you so much for taking time.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.